The text came through at 6:47 on a Thursday evening while I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror in my hotel room, fastening the second button of my good blouse. The one I'd set aside months ago, thinking it was right for a rehearsal dinner in a city like Savannah. Tonight's a little complicated. Stephanie's family has a thing planned. Might be better if you just rest. Dinner tomorrow after the ceremony. I read it twice. Then, a third time, the way you reread something when you understand the words but your mind refuses to assemble them into meaning. Might be better if you just rest. I set the phone down on the edge of the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror. The blouse was fine. My hair was done. I had driven 3 hours to the airport and flown from Akron to Savannah that morning. I had the handmade quilt folded in its cloth bag sitting on the bed behind me, the one I had spent 11 months piecing together from fabric that stretched back 4 generations. My grandmother's apron, my mother's Sunday dress, a scrap of the curtain from the house where Daniel was born. I had also brought an envelope. Inside it, a check for $8,000. Money I had saved by not replacing the water heater until it finally gave out in February. Money that had been sitting in a savings account labeled Daniel Wedding since the day he told me he'd proposed. I picked up the phone again. Read the message one more time. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, very slowly, the way you sit when your knees have gone uncertain, and I put my hands in my lap, and I breathed. The room smelled of old wood and something floral, the kind of air that cities near water carry. Through the window, the lights of River Street were beginning to flicker on. Pretty, warm, the sort of evening that belongs to celebrations. I did not go down to dinner. Daniel was 43 years old. He had been married once before, to a woman named Renee, and from that marriage, Renee had remarried and moved to Portland. Tyler lived in the dorms and came to me on holidays, always with his hair slightly too long and his laugh slightly too loud. And I loved him the way you love the people who remind you that some things survived the hard years. When Daniel told me about Stephanie, I was standing in my kitchen making soup. He called on a Sunday, which was unusual, because Daniel rarely called anymore. He mostly texted, and even those had grown short over the years. Fine, busy, talk soon. The calls had once been weekly, then monthly, then only when something needed saying. But that Sunday he called, and he told me Stephanie was from Connecticut, that her father was in finance, that her mother had gone to Wellesley, that the family had a house in Savannah where they'd been gathering for summers for 30 years. He said it with a particular kind of carefulness that I recognized immediately. The tone of a man who was editing himself in real time. I said the things a mother says. "I'm so happy for you. I can't wait to meet her. You sound good, Daniel." He did sound good. Lighter even. I told myself that was enough. The first time I met Stephanie was at Christmas, in Savannah, at the family home on Bull Street. A tall, beautiful house with black shutters and a jasmine vine along the porch railing. Her mother, Claudette, had the particular warmth of someone accustomed to hosting people she had already privately assessed. She complimented my earrings and offered me wine and never once asked where I was from. Stephanie was polished and pleasant. She laughed at the right moments and refilled glasses without being asked and sat beside Daniel at dinner with her hand resting lightly on his arm, like a small, constant reminder of ownership. I do not mean that unkindly. I understood it. He was hers now. I simply hadn't known until that dinner how completely. I drove home to Akron on December 27th. Daniel had hugged me at the door and said, "We'll figure out logistics for the wedding soon." He meant it when he said it. I could tell. But soon has a way of meaning something different to people who are not waiting. The wedding was set for May. By March, I still had not been asked about anything, not the guest list, not the ceremony details, not whether I'd need help with the flight. I finally called and asked directly. Daniel said it was a small ceremony, mostly Stephanie's family and close friends from their circle in Connecticut. He said there would be a dinner the night before. a gathering of people. He said, "I'd love for you to be part of it." I bought my plane ticket that afternoon. That night in the hotel room, after the text, I did something I had not done in a long time. I took out the quilt from its bag and spread it across the bed. I lay down beside it without touching it, just looked at it in the low light. The fabrics were so different from each other, and yet they fit. The pale blue of my grandmother's apron alongside the dark green of my mother's dress. The faded yellow of that old curtain. I had quilted each seam by hand. 11 months. I had not made it for Daniel. I understood that now. I slept poorly. The bed was soft. The room was quiet. But my mind ran its own inventory through the night. All the phone calls I had not pushed for. All the silences I had called him through. I remembered the year he lost his job in Cleveland, and I drove down every other weekend with groceries. Said nothing about the distance. Said nothing about the gas. I remembered when Tyler was born, and Renee didn't want family in the delivery room, and Daniel called me from the parking lot at 2 in the morning, voice cracked open, needing to tell someone. I was the someone. I was always the someone when things were not yet curated. By morning, I had made 2 decisions. The first was that I was not going to leave Savannah until Saturday, as planned. I was going to stay every one of the 4 nights I had booked and paid for. The second was that I needed a lawyer. I asked the woman at the front desk, who had kind eyes and an accent that made every sentence sound like a welcome. She gave me a card for a small firm 2 blocks from the hotel, said they were good people. I thanked her and walked there at 9 o'clock Friday morning with my coffee still in hand. The office was narrow and old, with bookshelves floor to ceiling and a ceiling fan that turned with a soft click on every rotation. The attorney who took my appointment was a woman named Frances, probably 60 herself, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of directness that skips pleasantries without being unkind. I told her what I needed. I wanted to update my will. I wanted to revise my beneficiary designations. I wanted to establish a trust with specific conditions. She opened a notepad and said, "Tell me what you're working with." I told her about the house in Akron. Paid off since 2019. I told her about the retirement accounts, modest but real. I told her about the savings, the investment account I had built quietly over 20 years because I had always believed it was a woman's business to make sure she had something of her own. "Who are the current beneficiaries?" she asked. "My son, Daniel, Merritt, and a small percentage to my grandson, Tyler. And what would you like to change?" I thought about that for a moment. I had not come in with a script, but the answer arrived fully formed, the way answers do when they've been waiting longer than you realized. "I want to reverse it," I said. "Tyler as primary. The house, the accounts, everything. Daniel removed entirely." Frances made a note. "And the trust conditions for Tyler? He's 19. I want it structured so he can access funds for education, medical expenses, and eventually a first home. Not before 25 for anything else." "That's straightforward," she said. "One question. Is Tyler currently enrolled in a degree program? Mechanical engineering, 2nd year. Pays most of it himself through scholarships and work study." Frances looked up briefly. "That's why you trust him." "Yes." She drafted the documents that afternoon. I came back at 3 to sign them. The pen felt heavier than I expected, but my hand did not hesitate. When it was done, Frances put the papers in a folder and handed me a copy. "The original is recorded and on file," she said. "It's legal and binding." I thanked her and shook her hand. Outside, the magnolias were in full bloom along the sidewalk, white and thick-petaled, dropping flowers on the pavement like something being let go of. Tyler called me that evening. I was sitting on a small bench in a park near the hotel, watching the river, eating a peach I had bought from a cart near the waterfront. "Grandma," he said, and his voice already had the shape of someone who knew something was wrong. "Where are you? Dad said you were in Savannah. Are you coming to the ceremony tomorrow?" "I'm in Savannah," I said. "I'm not sure about tomorrow. Did your father tell you anything?" There was a pause. The kind where a 19-year-old is choosing between loyalty and honesty. Tyler always chose honesty, even when it cost him something. He said it was complicated. He said Stephanie's family had a lot of people coming, and the seating was tight. Another pause. I didn't really understand what that meant. "It means I wasn't given a seat." Silence. "Grandma, it's all right, Tyler." "It's not all right." His voice had gone flat in the way it did when he was trying not to show how much something bothered him. His father's voice did the same thing once, a long time ago. "I have a seat. I'm in the 3rd row on the groom's side. I could." "You're going to sit in that seat," I said firmly. "You are his son. Your place is there, and yours isn't." I looked at the river. A boat was passing, slow and lit, people on the upper deck holding drinks. "I think my place has always been wherever I put it," I said. "I'm still figuring out where that is." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I see you tonight? I told Dad I was grabbing dinner with some friends. I could come to you instead." "I'd like that," I said. We ate at a small restaurant on a side street, the kind with candles and old bottles and a chalkboard menu. Tyler ordered the shrimp, which he said was genuinely unreal, and I had the she-crab soup, and we sat for 2 hours without talking about the wedding at all at first. He told me about his professors, about a project he was building in the engineering lab, about a girl in his thermodynamics class who he thought was impressive but terrifying. "She corrected the professor twice in one lecture," he said, out loud, in front of everyone. "Good for her," I said. He grinned. He had Daniel's jaw and my mother's eyes, that particular pale gray that goes serious without warning. Eventually he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "All right. What happened?" "Between you and Dad. Not just this week. Over the years." I set down my spoon. It was a fair question, and it deserved a real answer. Tyler was not a child asking to make sense of something too big for him. He was a young man who had watched both sides of his father's life and was trying to understand the map. "Your father grew away from where he came from," I said. "Not all at once. Gradually. He went to college and met people who lived differently. He started to care about fitting in with them more than he cared about holding on to what he had before. That's not unusual, but somewhere in that process, he started to feel that I was evidence of something he didn't want to be associated with anymore." Tyler frowned. "Because you're a bookkeeper from Akron?" "Because I'm a bookkeeper from Akron," I agreed. "I still have the same kitchen curtains I had when he was in high school. I drive a Buick that's 11 years old. I mispronounced quinoa at that Christmas dinner in front of Claudette. That's Grandma. That's not something a reasonable person." "I know," I said. "But people don't need reasonable reasons to be embarrassed by someone. They just need the feeling. And your father has had that feeling about me for a long time. He never said it. He didn't have to." Tyler looked down at his plate. "Did you ever say anything to him? Tell him it hurt?" "I tried, once. A few years ago. He said I was being sensitive, that I was reading into things." I folded my napkin on the table. "After that, I stopped trying to explain it and just kept showing up, kept helping. I thought if I was useful enough, I'd earn back the place I used to have." Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, "How much did you give him? Over the years?" I thought about whether to answer that. Then I decided there was no reason to protect numbers from the person who was now going to inherit what remained of them. In cash and direct transfers, a little over $40,000. "In the past 15 years, he looked up sharply. "Not including flights to visit," I said. Not including Tyler's winter coats every year until you were 17. Not including the laptop I sent you sophomore year of high school when yours died before finals. He stared at me. I didn't know. All of that came from you. I didn't say it did. I just sent things. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. A gesture I recognized. His father used to do that exact thing when something was too much to process, standing still. I went to a lawyer yesterday, I said. I changed my will. He went still. You're the primary beneficiary now. The house, the accounts, everything. There are conditions you can't touch the bulk of it until you're 25. Except for school, health, or a first home. Grandma. His voice had gone very careful. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'm not telling you, so you'll thank me. I'm telling you because it's done. And you should know. And because you've never once made me feel like a burden. Not once in 19 years. That counts for everything when you're my age. He was quiet long enough that I reached over and put my hand over his on the table. His were larger than I expected. When did that happen? I'll take care of it, he said finally. Whatever you leave, I'll take care of it the right way. I know you will. That's the point. He walked me back to the hotel after dinner. At the door, he hugged me longer than he had since he was a boy. I let him. The morning of the wedding, I dressed in gray slacks and a soft blue cardigan, not the good blouse, and I walked. Savannah in May is a particular kind of beautiful, the squares full of old trees and filtered light, the air carrying jasmine and river, and something warm underneath it all. I passed the Bull Street house where we'd had Christmas dinner. The jasmine vine was fuller now. I did not stop. The venue was a historic inn on the south end of the historic district, exactly the kind of place you'd expect Stephanie's family to book. Iron gates, a walled garden, magnolias arranged in tall vases along the path. I had looked it up online just to know what I was not going to. I found a bench in the square across the street. A good bench, shaded, with a view of the gate. I had the quilt with me, still in its cloth bag, because I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Guests arrived in pale linens and summer dresses. Stephanie's mother, in pale yellow, composed, directing something near the entrance. A string quartet warming up somewhere behind the garden wall. Notes drifting over the iron gate like smoke. Daniel arrived in a black car with the best man. He looked good. He was always a handsome man when he put effort in. And today, he had. Dark suit, no tie, boutonniere of white magnolia. He was laughing at something as he stepped out, his hand raised in a casual wave at someone near the door. He did not look across the street. I watched without expecting anything, without needing anything. Just a woman on a bench on a Saturday morning, watching a life she had helped build carry on without her. The ceremony took 24 minutes. I know, because I counted the clouds. 3 passed while the vows were being exchanged, white and unhurried against the blue. When the applause came, I stood, smoothed my cardigan, and picked up the cloth bag. I walked 2 squares over and sat at a different bench, one I'd found the day before near a fountain where pigeons gathered, and a man sold lemonade from a cart. I bought a cup. I sat with the quilt bag on my lap. Then I opened the bag and took out the quilt for the last time. I had made it for a marriage, but the marriage I had imagined, the one where I was present at the table and not across the street on a bench, had not happened. So I sat with the quilt across my knees and thought about what it was now. It was still what it had always been. Fabric, from women who stayed, women who showed up. It did not need a marriage to validate that. After a while, I folded it back up and tucked it in the bag and walked back to the hotel. Tyler texted at 4. I looked for you after. Figured you weren't coming in. You okay? More than okay, I wrote back. How was it? Nice, I guess. Pretty. Felt like a magazine. Nobody mentioned you. I wanted to say something during the toast, but didn't. Good, I replied. Not yours to carry. Can I come see you tomorrow morning? Before you fly out? I'd like nothing more. That night, I called my bank. Not the local branch, the toll-free line. I wanted to speak to someone who didn't know me, which seemed right for the kind of conversation that needed to be clean and businesslike and without sentimentality. I asked them to cancel all scheduled recurring transfers to Daniel Merritt. There were two. A monthly transfer of $700 I had started during the divorce, when things were tight, and which had simply never stopped, because he had never mentioned it, and I had never made myself mention it either. And a quarterly transfer I had set up 3 years ago. No particular occasion, just a transfer I made because the silence between us was so loud that I thought maybe filling it with money would soften it. The woman on the phone confirmed both. Would you like to cancel immediately or schedule a stop date? Immediately, I said. Is there any chance you'll want to reinstate these transfers in the future, or should I note the account as closed to further requests? Note it closed, I said. She processed it without commentary. I appreciated that. Afterward, I sat at the desk and opened the hotel notepad. Cream paper. Simple header. I uncapped a pen. I didn't write to Daniel. I had thought about it the way I'd thought about it that first night in the hotel, but in the end, I understood that the letter I had composed in my mind over 48 hours was not for him. It was for me, a way of marking what had happened, and I didn't need his eyes on it for it to be true. So instead, I wrote to Tyler. I wrote about the quilt, where each piece of fabric came from, what generation and what woman and what occasion. I wanted him to know the history in it, because eventually the quilt would be his to decide about. I wrote about his grandfather, my husband, Robert, who had died when Daniel was 34 and Tyler was just 6, and who had been the kind of man who fixed other people's porches on Saturdays without mentioning it. I wrote about Akron, about the house, about the garden where the tomatoes come up every August, whether I do anything to encourage them or not. I wrote about what I hoped for him, not that he would be successful in any particular way, not that he would marry the right person or land the right job or live in the right city, just that he would be honest, with himself and with the people who depended on him. Honesty is the thing that costs the most and the thing most worth keeping, I wrote. Don't let convenience talk you out of it. I stayed quiet too long because it was easier than speaking. Don't do what I did. I signed it. With everything, Grandma. I folded it and put it in my bag to give him in the morning. Tyler was waiting outside the hotel at 8 with 2 cups of coffee and his too long hair and a look on his face that was older than 19 by about 15 years. We walked to the riverfront and found a spot on the railing and drank our coffee and watched the boats. Did you talk to your dad last night? I asked. He texted to say the dinner was great. I said, yeah, it looked nice from the photos. He paused. He asked what I meant. I said I'd seen pictures online. He didn't respond. You don't need to fight my battle, Tyler. I know. He looked at the water. But I think I'm going to pull back a little from him. Not cut him off. I'm not. I don't want to do what he did to you. But I'm going to stop pretending it's fine. Stop being the good sport about everything. That sounds reasonable. I've been covering for him for a long time, telling myself he's just stressed or busy or going through something. But yesterday, watching him at that wedding, laughing and posing for pictures, and knowing you were somewhere in this city that you had flown to for him, he shook his head. I can't make that make sense. I handed him the letter from my bag. He looked at the envelope. Don't read it now, I said. Save it. He tucked it inside his jacket, carefully, like something that might need protecting. We walked a little after that, past the squares, past the bookshop with the wooden sign, past a woman walking a dog the size of a small couch. At one point, Tyler took my arm at a curb the way people take the arm of someone older, and I let him, though I didn't need it. At the airport, he carried my bag to the door. Text me when you land, he said. I will. He hugged me And this time, I held on for an extra second. There are moments that want to be documented and moments that just want to be felt. That one was for feeling. The flight home was smooth. I read half a novel I'd been carrying around for weeks without opening. I ordered tomato juice and watched the clouds for a while and didn't think about anything specific, just let the thinking rest. The Akron airport was gray and quiet. My car was where I'd left it in long-term parking, needing a jump because I had apparently left the interior light on, which would have embarrassed me a week ago but which I found only mildly funny now. A man with a jumper cable helped me without being asked, waved off my thanks, and drove away. People do that, quietly, all the time. You just have to be still enough to see it. My house looked exactly as I'd left it. The ceramic pot on the porch, the welcome mat that was no longer particularly welcoming but had been Robert's choice, and so I kept it. Inside, the same kitchen curtains, the same Buick in the driveway, the same 11-year-old familiar smell of home. I set the quilt on the kitchen table, still in its bag. I made tea. Real tea. From the canister on the shelf, not the paper sleeve from a hotel bathroom. I sat in the chair by the window that looks out over the backyard, where the tomatoes were already staking their claim on June. I thought about Daniel. Not with bitterness, not with the heavy, waterlogged feeling that had sat in my chest for so many years, the weight of waiting to be included, to be enough, to be seen as something other than an obligation inherited from a version of himself he'd rather forget. I thought about the boy who had once, at age 8, made me a birthday card out of a paper bag and crayons, because he had forgotten and had nothing else. Inside, he had drawn a picture of our house with 2 figures out front and printed in enormous letters. "You are my best mom." He had been genuine then. I believed that. And I believed that whatever closed off in him over the years was not hatred. It was smaller and sadder than hatred. It was discomfort. The particular discomfort of a person who has outrun their own origins and cannot figure out what to do with the evidence. I was the evidence. I couldn't change that. I couldn't make myself fit the frame he'd built. And I had spent too many years trying. Now I was done trying. Not done loving him. Love doesn't seem to have an off switch, which is its own particular inconvenience. But done waiting. Done sending money into silence. Done packing pieces of my heart into cloth bags and carrying them on airplanes to people who received them with the expression of someone receiving mail they hadn't requested. That night I took the quilt out of its bag and put it on my bed. It looked right there, the pale blue of my grandmother's apron, the green of my mother's dress, the faded yellow of the curtains from the house where Daniel was born. It was mine now. It had always been mine. In the weeks after I came home, I went through the house the way you do when you've come back from somewhere that clarified your thinking. Not to purge. Not to mourn, just to know what was there and decide what it was for. I gave away things I had held on to out of habit. Books I wasn't going to read again. A second set of dishes. A lamp that had never been in the right room. I kept the things that mattered. Robert's reading chair. The photo of Tyler at his high school graduation, squinting into the sun. A card my mother had sent me the year I turned 40 that said only, "You have always been exactly enough." Daniel called in June. Once. I let it ring. He left a voicemail brief, careful, the kind of message where every word was measured before it was spoken. He said he hoped I was well. He said he supposed he owed me an explanation. He said things had been complicated. I listened to it twice. Then I set the phone down and went out to check on the tomatoes. Tyler visited in July. He drove down from Columbus on a Saturday with a bag of groceries he wouldn't let me pay for, and spent the afternoon in my kitchen helping me make Robert's chili, which he had asked me to teach him 3 times over the years, and always been too busy before. He wore the locket I had given him. Not a locket. I hadn't given him a locket, but he had folded the letter I'd written him in Savannah and laminated it at the library which made me laugh so hard I had to sit down. For preservation, he said, completely serious. You laminated a letter. It's archival. I looked it up. We ate chili on the back porch and watched the August heat settle into the yard. He told me about his classes. The girl from thermodynamics who was apparently not as terrifying upon further acquaintance. She corrected me once, he said, out loud. In front of everyone. Did you deserve it? He grinned. A little. Before he left, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me with that old soul expression he had, the one that surfaced when he was trying to say something true and didn't quite have the words yet. I read the letter, he said. The real one. A bunch of times. I figured you would. The part about staying quiet too long? He paused. I'm not going to do that. Whatever happens with Dad, with anyone, I'm going to say the thing. Good, I said. He nodded, satisfied with that. Then he hugged me at the door and drove back to Columbus in the late afternoon light. After he was gone, the house settled into its evening quiet. The tomatoes were coming in better than any year in recent memory. The welcome mat on the porch was still fraying at one corner. The curtains were still the same curtains. Some people would see this life and find it small. A retired bookkeeper in Akron with an old Buick and a kitchen garden and curtains that needed replacing. A woman whose son did not invite her to his wedding. But I know what I built. I know every dollar I earned, and every dollar I gave, and every night I stayed up, and every morning I chose to get up and try again. I know the weight of a handmade quilt and what it means to have carried it to a city you were not really wanted in, and brought it back home again without shame. I sat in Robert's chair that evening with a cup of tea and the quilt across my knees. The light came through the window the way it does in late summer, gold and long, the kind that makes even ordinary things look like they're worth remembering. And I thought, simply, I was a good mother, not a perfect one, not always patient, not always wise, but present, steady. The kind who shows up and stays. No one can take that. Not a text, not a wedding that happened without me, not a son who chose the curated version of his life over the woman who gave him the first version. I was a good mother, and I am still here. If you've listened this far, maybe it's because some part of this story lives in you somewhere. Maybe you've stood in a parking lot while something happened inside that was supposed to include you. Maybe you've signed checks and folded quilts and flown to cities carrying the best of yourself only to be told there wasn't room. I want to say this plainly. You are not too much. You are not embarrassing. You are not a problem to be managed or a memory to be edited out of a better story. You are the root, and roots do not need permission to remain. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever folded something made with love back into its bag and carried it home again, know this. What you carry home is not failure. It is yours. All of it. Still yours.